Reincarnation and the Law of Karma by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 1. Primitive Foundations and Global Beliefs. By reincarnation, we designate the recurrent incarnation or embodiment within the flesh of the soul, that immaterial component of man's constitution. The appellation metempsychosis is frequently utilized to convey an identical meaning, the definition of this latter term being the transit of the soul as an immortal essence upon the cessation of the body into another living corporeal form. The phrase transmigration of souls is occasionally invoked, this term being employed to signify the passage from one corporeal vessel into another. However, the term transmigration is frequently associated with the tenets of certain primitive races, who maintained that the human soul occasionally transferred into the forms of lower animals as retribution for transgressions committed during human existence. Yet, this notion is regarded with disrepute by the proponents of reincarnation or metempsychosis, possessing no affinity with their philosophy or convictions, these concepts having originated from a wholly distinct source and sharing no commonality. There exist numerous forms of belief and varying degrees of doctrine regarding reincarnation, as we shall observe as we advance. Nevertheless, a fundamental and basal principle underlies all the diverse shades of opinion and sectarian divisions. This cardinal tenet may be articulated as the doctrine that there resides within man an immaterial something which does not succumb to the demise or disintegration of the physical frame, but rather persists as an entity. Furthermore, following a briefer or more protracted interval of repose, it reincarnates or is reborn into a new physique, that of an unborn infant, from whence it proceeds to experience a fresh existence in the flesh, more or less oblivious to its antecedent lives, yet retaining within itself the essence or consequences of its past history. These experiences serve to construct its new character or personality. It is generally maintained that this rebirth is governed by the law of attraction, under one designation or another, which operates in accordance with rigorous justice. It functions to draw the reincarnating soul toward a specific body and set of conditions aligned with the proclivities of the former life, while the parents simultaneously attract unto themselves a soul bound to them by ancient ties. Thus, the law remains universal, uniform, and equitable to all parties involved. This constitutes a general synopsis of the doctrine as it is typically entertained by the most erudite of its adherents. E.D. Walker, a distinguished English author upon the subject, presents the subsequent exquisite concept of the general teachings. Reincarnation posits that the soul enters this existence not as a novel creation, but following a prolonged progression of prior lives upon this earth and elsewhere, during which it acquired its present inherent peculiarities. Furthermore, it is en route to future transformations which the soul is presently fashioning. It asserts that infancy delivers to earth neither a blank scroll for the commencement of a terrestrial record, nor a mere cohesion of atomic forces into a transient personality destined to dissolve rapidly into the elements. Rather, it is inscribed with ancestral histories, some resembling the current scene, though most are dissimilar, extending backward into the remotest antiquity. These inscriptions remain generally undecipherable, save as revealed through their molding influence upon the new career. Yet, like the latent photographic images impressed by the sun of all its surveys, when they are properly developed in the laboratory of consciousness, they shall be distinctly displayed. The current phase of existence shall also be deposited within the secret vaults of memory, preserved for its unconscious effects upon ensuing lives. All attributes we currently possess, in body, mind, and soul, result from our utilization of ancient opportunities. We are, indeed, the heir of all the ages, and we alone bear responsibility for our inheritances. For these conditions accrue from distant causes engendered by our former selves, and the future flows by the divine law of cause and effect from the accumulated momentum of our past impetuses. There exists no favoritism within the universe. Rather, all possess the identical everlasting facilities for growth. Those who are presently elevated in worldly station may be submerged in humble surroundings in the future. Only the interior traits of the soul remain permanent companions. The opulent sluggard may become the mendicant of the next existence, while the industrious laborer of the present sows the seeds of future grandeur. Suffering bravely endured now will yield a treasure of patience and fortitude in a subsequent life. Hardships will engender strength. Self-denial must cultivate the will. Tastes refined in this existence will inevitably bear fruit in those to come, and acquired energies will assert themselves whenever possible, via the law of parsimony upon which the principles of physics are founded. Vice versa, the unconscious habits, the uncontrollable impulses, the peculiar tendencies, the favored pursuits, and the soul-stirring friendships of the present descend from far-reaching previous activities. The doctrine of reincarnation, metempsychosis, or rebirth has invariably been embraced as truth by a vast portion of the human race. Following the invariable law of cyclic changes, the oscillation of the pendulum of thought, it has, at times, apparently expired in certain regions of the world, only to be succeeded once more by a new birth and interest among the descendants of the same populace. It is a luminary impossible to extinguish, although its flickering flame may appear to wane for a moment. The shifting of the mental winds permits it to rekindle from the hidden spark, and lo, it bursts once more into renewed life and vigor. The reawakened interest regarding this subject within the Western world, of which all acute observers have taken note, stands as yet another instance of the operation of the cyclic law. It begins to appear as though the occultists are correct in their prediction that, before the dawn of another century, the Western world will have once more embraced the doctrines of rebirth. That ancient, discarded truth, once so cherished by the race, will again be established in popular favor and advance toward the status of orthodox teaching, perhaps to be crystallized once more by reason of its very orthodoxy, and subsequently to lose favor and fade, as the pendulum swings backward to the opposing extreme of thought. Yet, the teaching of reincarnation has never entirely vanished from the race. In certain regions of the globe, the lamp has been kept burning brilliantly. Nay, more, at no time in human history has there existed a period in which the majority of the race has not accepted the doctrine of rebirth in some of its various forms. It was thus 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 5,000, and it remains thus today. In this 20th century, nearly if not fully 2/3 of the race adhere firmly to the teaching, and the multitudes of Hindus and other Eastern peoples cling to it tenaciously. Furthermore, even beyond these populations, traces of the doctrine are to be discovered among other races in the East and West. Thus, reincarnation is not a forgotten truth or a discarded doctrine, but one fully vital and vigorous, destined to play a highly significant role in the history of Western thought during the 20th century. It is intriguing to trace the history of this doctrine among ancient peoples, reaching far back into the dim recesses of the past. It is arduous to ascribe the credit of having originated reincarnation to any particular era or specific race. Notwithstanding the decided opinions and differing theories of various writers on this subject, who would cite Egypt, India, or the lost Atlantis as the birthplace of the doctrine, We perceive that such concepts are mere attempts to attribute a universal, intuitive belief to some favored fraction of the race. We do not believe that the doctrine of reincarnation ever originated in any specific locale as a novel and distinct tenet. We contend that it sprang into existence whenever and wherever man arrived at a stage of intellectual development sufficient to enable him to form a mental conception of a something that survived death. Regardless of the source from which this belief in a ghost originated, one is compelled to admit that it is present among all peoples, constituting an ostensibly universal concept. Concurrently, among primitive societies, one discerns a perpetual, albeit somewhat nebulous and indefinite, notion that in some manner and at some juncture, this spirit of the individual returns to terrestrial existence, assuming a fresh corporeal vestment, a new body. It is at this precise juncture that the concept of reincarnation originates, manifesting ubiquitously upon the attainment of a specific tier of human intellectual development. This tenet proceeds in parallel with the spectral hypothesis and appears inextricably intertwined with that conception in virtually every instance. As humanity evolves further, the intellect deduces that if the spirit is immortal, surviving corporeal dissolution to inhabit a new form, it must logically have existed prior to the most recent nativity, thereby possessing an extensive lineage of antecedent lives. This constitutes the second stage of reasoning. The third stage emerges when the mind reasons that the subsequent existence is contingent upon actions performed or omitted during the current life. It is upon these three fundamental postulates that the doctrine of reincarnation has been established. The occultists maintain that, supplementary to this universal and largely intuitive concept, the race has periodically received instruction from distinct advanced entities who have ascended to superior planes of existence. Beings now designated as masters, adepts, teachers, race guides, etc. Yet, irrespective of the underlying explanation, it remains an immutable truth that humanity appears to have independently formulated, across all eras and locations, first, the conception of a spirit that endures following somatic death, and second, the conviction that this spirit has inhabited previous forms and will return to assume a new corporeal vessel. While diverse theories exist regarding celestial and infernal realms, underlying them all persists this principle of rebirth in one of its manifold phases. Saldi, the archaeologist, has published a compelling series of treatises examining the creeds of primitive peoples who have since departed the stage of human activity. He demonstrates, through the surviving fragments of carving and sculpture, that a universal notion existed among them regarding a spirit that survived physical demise, accompanied by a corresponding belief that at some future date this spirit would return to the theater of its former endeavors. This conviction occasionally manifested as a return to the original form, a concept leading to somatic preservation via mummification and similar processes. Yet, as a general rule, this belief evolved into the more sophisticated doctrine of rebirth within a new body. Early travelers in Africa reported discovering, in various locales, evidences and vestiges of what appeared to them a peculiar belief regarding the prospective return of the soul to a new earthly vessel. Similarly, early explorers of the Americas encountered analogous traditions and tenets among the Red Indians, survivals of which endure to this very day. It is recorded of numerous savage tribes in disparate regions of the globe that they deposit the remains of their deceased children by the roadside. This is done to afford their souls a favorable opportunity to acquire new bodies through proximity to the numerous pregnant women traversing the thoroughfare. A significant number of these primitive societies adhere to the concept of a complex soul, composed of multiple distinct elements, in which respect they resemble the Egyptians, Hindus, Chinese, and indeed all mystical and occult philosophies. The Fiji Islanders are purported to believe in a black soul and a white soul. The former remains with the interred corpse and disintegrates alongside it, whereas the white soul departs to wander as a spirit, subsequently tiring of such vagrancy and returning to life within a new body. The indigenous inhabitants of Greenland are said to posit the existence of an astral form that separates from the physical vessel during slumber but perishes as the body decays following death, alongside a secondary soul that departs only at the moment of expiration, persisting until it is reborn at a subsequent time. Indeed, the scholar ascertains that nearly all primitive and semi-civilized races exhibit traces of a belief in a complex soul, as well as vestiges of the doctrine of reincarnation in some modality. The human intellect appears to operate along identical trajectories across diverse races. Yet, even if one subscribes to the theory that all humanity originated from a single root race and that these various creeds are survivals of some primordial fundamental doctrine, the facts remain undisturbed in either instance. In this latter connection, one might observe that the traditions concerning ancient Atlantis, that lost continent, universally suggest that her populace adhered firmly to the belief in reincarnation and the concept of the complex soul. As the survivors of Atlantis are believed to have been the progenitors of the Egyptians on the one hand, and of the ancient Peruvians on the other, both branches having preserved their original tenets as modified by disparate environments, one might hereby discern an explanation for the prevalence of this doctrine on both sides of the ocean. We allude to this merely in passing, as a matter of general interest within the scope of our subject. Chapter 2. Ancient Mystic Civilizations. Having contemplated the existence of the doctrines of reincarnation among primitive societies, and its traditional presence among the vanished civilizations of antiquity, we find ourselves inexorably drawn toward that ancient domain of mystery, the abode of the mystics and occultists of yore, the land of Isis, the home of the architects of the pyramids, and the people of the Sphinx. Whether this populace constituted the direct lineage of the inhabitants of destroyed Atlantis, the seat of ancient wisdom, or whether they were a nascent civilization that had rediscovered the archaic doctrines, the immutable reality persists that when tracing the origins of any ancient occult or mystic tenet, we are gradually guided toward the land of the Sphinx as the fountainhead of that concealed truth. The Sphinx stands as an appropriate emblem of that magnificent race. Its sealed lips appear to invite ultimate inquiries, and one senses that a whispered response may be wafted from those tightly closed lips toward the auditory sense that is prepared to hear and receive it. Consequently, in our quest for the genesis of reincarnation, we find ourselves once again confronting the Egyptian Sphinx, as we have done so frequently in our pursuit of truth. Notwithstanding its evident prehistoric origin, many have postulated that metempsychosis found its birthplace in ancient Egypt, upon the banks of the Nile. The Indian subcontinent contests this assertion, maintaining that the Ganges, rather than the Nile, gave birth to the doctrine. Regardless of such contention, we shall address the Egyptian conception at this juncture among the ancient lands preserving the doctrine. For in India it is not a relic of the past, but a doctrine that has attained its fullest efflorescence in the present era, a flower that is currently disseminating its subtle redolence to all quarters of the civilized world. Thus, we shall defer our consideration of India's teachings until we arrive at the contemporary stage of the history of reincarnation. Herodotus, many centuries past, observed of the Egyptians that they were the first to propound the theory that the human soul is imperishable, and that when the body of any individual expires, the soul enters into another body that may be ready to receive it. Furthermore, when it has traversed the cycle of all created forms on land, in water, and in air, it once again enters a human body born for it, and this cycle of existence for the soul transpires over a period of 3,000 years. The doctrine of reincarnation is discernible, albeit concealed amidst the mass of esoteric doctrines situated behind the exoteric teachings of the Egyptians, the latter of which were expounded to the common populace, while the truth was reserved for the select few who were prepared for it. The inner circles of the Egyptian mystics believed in and comprehended the interior truths of reincarnation, and although they guarded the esoteric teachings with vigilance, remnants nevertheless descended from the table and were avidly appropriated by the masses, as we may ascertain by an examination of the fragmentary historical archives that have been preserved, graven in stone and impressed upon bricks. Not only did these people accept the doctrine of reincarnation, but Egypt was truly the domicile of the highest occult teachings. The doctrines and instructions regarding the several sheaths or bodies of man, which are promulgated by occultists of all eras and races, are believed to have been taught in their original purity upon the banks of the Nile and in the shadow of the pyramids, indeed even prior to the epoch of the pyramids. Their 40 centuries of history witnessed many modifications of philosophical and religious beliefs, yet the fundamental doctrine of reincarnation was adhered to during the entire period of history in ancient Egypt, and was not discarded until the degenerate scions of that once mighty race were overwhelmed by more vigorous nations, whose religions and beliefs superseded the vestiges of the ancient doctrine. The Egyptians maintained that there existed the Ka, the divine spirit in man, the Ab, the intellect or will, the Hadi, the vitality, the Tet, the astral body, the Sahu, the etheric double, and the Xa, the physical body, classifications which correspond to the various bodies of man as recognized by occultists today. The ancient Chaldeans also promulgated the doctrine of rebirth. The fraternity of Persian and Chaldean mystics and occultists, known as the Magi, who were adepts of the hidden wisdom, adhered to the doctrine of reincarnation as one of their fundamental truths. Indeed, they succeeded in educating the masses of their populace to a significantly higher degree than the masses of the Egyptians. Escaping the idolatrous proclivities of the Egyptian populace, they manifested a very high degree of pure philosophical, occult, and religious knowledge. The Magi taught that the soul was a composite entity, and that certain portions of it perished, while certain other parts survived and transitioned through a series of terrestrial and otherworld existences, until finally it attained such a degree of purity that it was relieved of the necessity for further incarnation, and thenceforth dwelt in the region of transcendent felicity, the realm of eternal light. The teaching also maintained that immediately prior to entering into the state of bliss, the soul was capable of surveying its antecedent incarnations, discerning distinctly the connection between them, and thus acquiring a reservoir of the wisdom of experience, which would aid it in its future labors as a benefactor to future races that would appear upon the face of the earth. The Magi taught that as all living things, nay, all things possessing existence, organic or inorganic, were but varying manifestations of the singular life and being, therefore the highest knowledge necessitated a sentiment of conscious brotherhood and relationship toward and with all. Even among the Chinese, there existed an esoteric doctrine concerning reincarnation beneath the external teachings of ages past. It may be discerned in the instructions of the early philosophers and seers of that race, notably in the work of Lao Tzu, the great Chinese sage and preceptor. Lao Tzu, whose magnum opus, the Tao Te King, is a classic, taught reincarnation to his inner circle of students and adherents, at least as many authorities claim. He taught that there existed a fundamental principle designated Tao, which is held to have been identical with the primordial rationale, a manifestation of which was the Te, or the creative activity of the universe. From the union and action of the Tao and the Te proceeded the universe, including the human soul, which he taught was composed of several parts, among them being the Huan or spiritual principle and the Phi or semi-material vital principle, which together animate the body. Lao Tzu stated, "To be ignorant that the true self is immortal is to remain in a lamentable condition of fallacy, and to experience many calamities by reason thereof. Know ye that there is a part of man which is subtle and spiritual, and which is the celestially oriented portion of himself. That which pertains to flesh, bones, and body belongs to the earth, earthly to earth, heavenly to heaven. Such is the law." Some have contended that Lao Tzu taught the instantaneous reversion of the Huan to the Tao after death. However, from the writings of his early followers, it may be perceived that he actually taught that the Huan persisted in individuated existence throughout repeated incarnations, returning to the Tao only when it had completed its cycle of experience life. For instance, in the Sihe it is written, "The vital essence is dispersed after death together with the body, bones, and flesh, but the soul or knowing principle of the self is preserved and does not perish." There is no immediate absorption of the individuality into the Tao, for individuality persists and manifests itself according to the law. And Chuangzi declared, "Death is but the commencement of a new life." Furthermore, the early Taoists propounded that the deeds, both virtuous and malevolent, performed in the present existence would inevitably fructify in future incarnations. This doctrine supplemented the orthodox heavens and hells embraced by Chinese belief, which existed in a vast multiplicity tailored to the exigencies of diverse gradations of saints and sinners, their specificities delineated with that meticulous attention to minutiae so characteristic of the Chinese intellect. Subsequent doctrines, positing that the ancestral spirit resided permanently within the ancestral hall, constituted a corruption of the primordial instruction. Other Chinese sages maintained a tripartite conception of the soul. The first element, the K, seated in the abdomen, perished with the corporeal form. The second, the Ling, residing in the heart or thorax, persisted briefly post-mortem before eventual dissolution. And the third, the Huan, enthroned within the cerebrum, survived the disintegration of its counterparts to traverse into subsequent existences. Although it may appear singular to those unacquainted with the subject, the ancient Druids, especially those inhabiting ancient Gaul, were thoroughly conversant with the doctrine of reincarnation and adhered strictly to its tenets. These peoples, frequently dismissed as archaic barbarians, in truth possessed a philosophy of a superior order which coalesced into a mystic form of religion. Upon their conquest of Gallia, many Romans were astounded by the depth and character of the philosophical erudition mastered by the Druids, and several bequeathed written records attesting to this, notably Aristotle, Caesar, Lucan, and Valerius Maximus. The Christian theologians who succeeded them similarly bore witness to these realities, as evidenced by references within the works of Saint Clement, Saint Cyril, and other early patristic authorities. These supposed barbarians entertained some of the most exalted spiritual conceptions concerning life, immortality, the intellect, and the soul. Raynaud has discoursed upon them, grounding his assertions in a rigorous examination of the ancient creeds of this race. If Judea represents to the world, with unique tenacity, the concept of a personal and absolute deity, and if Greece and Rome symbolize the idea of society, then Gaul represents, with equal particularity, the idea of immortality. Nothing characterized it more aptly, as all the ancients conceded. That enigmatic people was regarded as the privileged custodian of the secrets of death. Their unwavering, instinctive faith in the persistence of life never ceased to provoke astonishment, and occasionally trepidation, in the eyes of the heathen. The Gauls possessed an occult philosophy and a mystic religion, both of which were obliterated by the influences of the Roman conquest. The Druidic philosophy bore a remarkable resemblance to the inner doctrine of the Egyptians and their successors, the Grecian mystics. Vestiges of Hermeticism and Pythagoreanism are clearly discernible, although the historical nexus binding them together has been lost. Druidic legends link their order with ancient Aryan creeds and teachings, and there appears to have been a profound connection between these priests and those of ancient Greece, for there are accounts of offerings dispatched to Greek temples by the priests of Gaul. It is further related that on the island of Delphos there once stood a Druidic tomb in the form of a monument, believed to have been erected over the remains of Druid priestesses. Herodotus and others speak of a clandestine alliance between the priesthoods of Greece and the Druids. Certain ancient legends maintain that Pythagoras was the preceptor of the Druidic priests, and that Pythagoras himself was in intimate communication with the Brahmins of India and the Hermetists of Egypt. Other traditions assert that the Druids received their initial instruction from Zamolys, who had been a slave and disciple of Pythagoras. Regardless, the correspondence between the two schools of philosophy is remarkable. While much of the Druidic instruction has been lost and the fragments are difficult to reconstruct, sufficient knowledge remains to indicate the aforementioned relationship to the Pythagorean school and the firm grasp the doctrine of reincarnation held upon the Druids. The extant fragments demonstrate that the Druids postulated an immaterial, spiritual component in man, termed on, which emanated from a universal spiritual principle of life. They taught that this on had animated lower forms of existence, mineral, vegetable, and animal, prior to incarnating as man. In those conditions, it was entangled and incarcerated in a state of abysmal circling known as a nufu, from which it finally escaped to enter the circle of freedom, called Abrid, comprising human incarnation and beyond. This state of Abrid encompasses existence within the various human races on this and other planets, until finally a further liberation of the on occurs, passing into the circle of bliss or Gwynfid, where it abides for eons in a state of ecstatic being. Yet, beyond even this transcendent state lies another, termed the circle of the infinite or Sugant, which is identical to the union with God of the Persian and Greek mystics, or the nirvana of the Hindus. Is this not a rather advanced form of philosophy for barbarians? Particularly when contrasted with the crude mythology of their Roman conquerors. The Gauls were so advanced in the practical phases of occultism that they granted every condemned criminal a respite of 5 years between the sentence of death and execution. This was permitted so that he might prepare himself for a future state through meditation, instruction, and other disciplines, and also to prevent the ushering of an unprepared and guilty soul into the plane of the departed, the advantages of which are apparent to every student of occultism who accepts the teaching regarding the astral planes. The reader will doubtless understand that the degree of advancement in spiritual and philosophical matters evidenced by the Gauls was due not to the general population being so far superior to their neighbors, but rather to the fact that they had been tutored by the Druid priests among them. Tradition holds that the original Druidic priests arrived in Gaul and other countries from a distant land, likely Egypt or Greece. We have alluded to the connection between their teachings and those of the Pythagoreans, and there was undoubtedly a potent bond of relationship between these priests and the occultists of other lands. The Druidic priests were profoundly versed in astronomy and astrology, and the planets occupied a significant role in their teachings. A portion of their ritual is said to correspond with early Jewish rites and worship. Their favored symbol, the mistletoe, was utilized to indicate rebirth, representing the new life springing forth from the old, typified by the oak. The Druids voyaged into ancient Britain and Ireland, where many traces of their religious rites may still be discovered, not only in the form of stone places of worship but also in numerous curious local customs among the peasantry. Many a fragment of English folklore, many a singular Irish fancy concerning fairies and the like, symbols of good fortune, banshees, and the little folk, descended honestly to these people from the era of the Druids. From the same source derived the many whispered tales among both races regarding the birth of children who appeared to possess remembrances of former lives on earth, memories which faded as they matured. Among these people, there remains an undercurrent of mystic ideas concerning souls returning in some mysterious manner not fully comprehended. It is the inheritance from the Druids. Chapter 3. Greco-Roman Spiritual Thought. An individual unacquainted with the subject might naturally anticipate discovering that the ancient Romans were highly advanced in the realms of philosophy, religion, and spiritual speculation, particularly when judging by the omnipotent influence they exerted over the affairs of the entire known world. Especially when one considers Rome's relationship and connection with ancient Greece, it would appear that these two civilizations must have shared much within the intellectual sphere. However, such is not the case. Although the exoteric religions of the Romans resembled those of the Greeks, from whom they were borrowed or inherited, there existed scant original thought regarding metaphysics, religion, or philosophy among the Romans. This was likely attributable to the fact that the entire inclination of Rome was toward material advancement and attainment, with negligible attention being accorded to matters concerning the soul, the future life, and similar spiritual concerns. A select few of Rome's philosophers advanced theories regarding the future state. However, beyond a vague form of ancestor worship, the masses displayed minimal interest in the subject. Cicero, admittedly, articulated sentiments indicating a belief in immortality when he stated in Scipio's dream, "Know that it is not thou, but thy body alone, which is mortal. The individual in his entirety resides in the soul, and not in the outward form. Learn, then, that thou art a god, thou, the immortal intelligence which gives movements to a perishable body, just as the eternal God animates an incorruptible body." Pliny the Younger bequeathed writings that appear to suggest his belief in the reality of phantoms, and Ovid composed verses indicating his recognition of a component of man that survived the demise of the body. Yet, in the aggregate, Roman philosophy treated immortality as a phenomenon that might perchance exist, but remained unproven. It was to be viewed as a poetical expression of longing rather than as an established, or at least well-grounded, principle of philosophical thought. Conversely, Lucretius and others of his era and nation protested against the folly of the belief in the survival of the soul held by other nations. He asserted that the fear of eternal life should be banished from the universe. It disturbs the peace of mankind, for it prevents the enjoyment of any security or pleasure. Furthermore, Virgil lauded the philosophical attitude that was capable of discerning the true causes of things and was, therefore, able to reject the unworthy dread of a world beyond, as well as all fears arising from such a belief. Yet, even many Roman philosophers, while denying immortality, believed in supernatural powers and beings and remained highly superstitious and credulous in many respects. Thus, their philosophy of non-survival was evidently the result of temperament and the pursuit of material concerns rather than the pinnacle of philosophical reasoning or metaphysical thought. Consequently, the Romans stand distinct from the majority of ancient peoples regarding the belief in reincarnation. While individual mystics and occultists existed among them, It remains a fact that the majority of the populace held no such belief. Indeed, the masses possessed no lucid concepts regarding the survival of the soul. This constitutes a curious anomaly to the general rule, one that has provoked considerable commentary and attention among thinkers in these fields. A vague form of ancestor worship existed among the Romans, but even this pertained to the collective survival of ancestors and was devoid of ordinary metaphysical speculations and religious dogmas. Broadly stated, the Roman belief may be expressed by the concept of a less material, or more subtle, component of man that escaped disintegration after death. This component, in some mysterious manner, passed on to combine with the ancestral soul that constituted the collective ancestral deity of the family, the peace and pleasure of which were held as sacred duties by the descendants, with sacrifices and offerings being made toward this end. Nevertheless, interspersed among the Romans were eminent thinkers who appeared to harbor a vague, tentative belief in some form of reincarnation, such as Ovid, who stated, "Nothing perishes, although everything changes here on earth. The souls come and go unendingly in visible forms. The animals which have acquired goodness will take upon them human form." Similarly, Virgil remarked, "After death, the souls come to the Elysian fields or to Tartarus, and there meet with the reward or punishment of their deeds during life. Later, on drinking of the waters of Lethe, which takes away all memory of the past, they return to earth." Yet, it must be admitted that Rome was generally deficient in spiritual insight and beliefs. Her material successes had diverted her attention from the problems that had so engrossed the mind of her neighbor Greece, and her elder sisters Persia, Chaldea, and Egypt. Among the Greeks, on the contrary, we discover a pronounced degree of interest and speculation regarding the immortality of the soul, as well as significant engagement with the doctrines of metempsychosis or reincarnation. Although the great masses of the Grecian populace were satisfied with their popular mythology and were indisposed to question further or to indulge in keen speculation on metaphysical subjects, the intellectual stratum of the race was largely active in the pursuit of truth. Their schools of philosophy, with their numerous followers and adherents, have left an indelible mark upon human thought unto this day. Second only to the Hindus, the Greeks were the preeminent philosophers of the human race. Furthermore, the occultists and mystics among them were equal to those of Persia, India, Chaldea, or Egypt. While the various theories regarding the soul were as the sands of the sea, so numerous were the teachers, schools, and divisions of thought among these people. The doctrine of reincarnation nonetheless played a pivotal role in their philosophy. The prevailing concept was that worthy souls proceed to a state of bliss without rebirth, while the less worthy traverse the waters of the river Lethe, quaffing of its waters of forgetfulness. Thus, having the recollection of their earth life and the period of punishment undergone by reason of the same obliterated and cleansed from their memories, they proceed to rebirth. One of the ancient Orphic hymns reads as follows: "The wise love light and not darkness. When you travel the journey of life, remember always the end of the journey. When souls return to the light, after their sojourn on earth, they wear upon their more subtle bodies, like searing, hideous scars, the marks of their earthly sins. These must be obliterated, and they go back to earth to be cleansed. But the pure, virtuous, and strong proceed direct to the son of Dionysus." The teachings of the Egyptians left a profound impression upon the Grecian mind. Not only the common forms of belief, but also the esoteric doctrines were transmitted to the younger civilization by the elder. Pythagoras was the preeminent occult instructor of Greece, and his school, along with those of his followers, accepted and promulgated the great doctrine of reincarnation. A significant portion of his teaching was reserved for the initiates of the mystic orders founded by himself and his disciples, yet much of the doctrine was nonetheless disseminated publicly. Both Orpheus and Pythagoras, although separated by several centuries, were students at the fount of knowledge in Egypt. Having traveled to that country to be initiated into the mystic orders of the ancient land, they returned to teach anew the ancient doctrine of rebirth. The Pythagorean teaching resembles that of the Hindus and Egyptians regarding the nature of man, his several bodies or sheaths, and the survival of the higher aspect of his nature, while the lower component perishes. It was propounded that, subsequent to death, this superior aspect of the soul transmigrated to a region of beatitude. Therein, it acquired enlightenment and experienced the salutary influence of evolved and exalted spirits, thereby becoming equipped for a renewed existence replete with incentives toward loftier aspirations. However, not having yet attained that stage of development requisite for eternal habitation within these Elysian domains, the soul inevitably encounters the termination of its probationary interval. Subsequently, it descends toward another terrestrial incarnation, a further progression upon the path of attainment. The doctrine further posited that the conditions, circumstances, and environments characterizing the new earthly existence were predetermined by the actions, volitions, and mental proclivities of the preceding life, as well as by the degree of evolution manifested throughout the several anterior incarnations. In this regard, the instruction accords materially with the universal tenets concerning reincarnation and karma. Pythagoras maintained that the principle of reincarnation elucidated the palpable inequalities observable in human existence, offering a logical rationale for the same and establishing the reality of a universal and ultimate justice, explicable upon no other grounds. He expounded that, although the material realm was subject to the immutable laws of destiny and fatality, there existed a superior state of being wherein the soul might transcend the statutes of the lower world. This elevated state, he asserted, possessed autonomous laws, as yet obscure to mankind, which functioned to resolve the imperfect ordinances of the material sphere, thereby establishing harmony, justice, and equality to rectify the apparent deficiencies manifested in terrestrial life. Succeeding Pythagoras, Plato, the preeminent Grecian philosopher, promulgated the archaic yet revitalized doctrine of rebirth. He instructed that the souls of the deceased are compelled to return to earth. Therein, within new lives, they must exhaust the consequences of former terrestrial deeds, receiving recompense for the meritorious and retribution for the ignoble, whilst the soul profits from these reiterated experiences, ascending incrementally toward the divine. Plato posited that the reincarnated soul retains fleeting recollections of its prior existences, alongside instincts and intuitions acquired through antecedent experiences. He classified innate ideas among these inherited legacies of former lives. It has been aptly observed that all knowledge may be discovered within Plato. Consequently, one who quests for the ancient Grecian concepts concerning reincarnation and the enigmas of the soul may locate that which he seeks within the writings of the venerable sage and philosopher. Plato was the consummate master of the esoteric teachings concerning the soul, and all who have succeeded him have drawn liberally from his vast reservoir of wisdom. His influence upon the early Christian Church was immense, and in manifold forms, it persists even unto the present day. Many of the early Christian fathers propounded that Plato was, in actuality, one among the numerous precursors of Christ, having prepared the pagan world for the advent of the Master. In Phaedo, Plato delineates the nature of the soul and expounds upon its immortality. He teaches that man possesses a material body subject to perpetual mutation, death, and disintegration, as well as an immaterial soul, immutable, indestructible, and akin to the divine. At the moment of death, this soul was severed from its physical companion and ascended, purified, to the higher regions, where it rendered an account of itself and received its allotted future. If it were ascertained to be sufficiently untainted and unsullied by the mire of material existence, it was deemed eligible for admission to the state of bliss, characterized as union with the Supreme Being, the latter described as spirit, eternal, and omniscient. The ignoble and deeply culpable souls undergo a duration of punishment, or purgation, to the end that they may be cleansed and purified of their guilt prior to being permitted another attempt at perfection. Those souls neither sufficiently pure for the state of bliss nor so impure as to necessitate the purgative process were returned to terrestrial life, there to inhabit new bodies and endeavor to work out their salvation anew, that they might eventually attain the blissful state. Plato taught that, in the process of rebirth, the soul remains generally unconscious of its previous lives, although it may experience flashes of recollection. Furthermore, it possesses a form of intuition and innate ideation, believed to be the cumulative result of experiences gained in past lives, knowledge garnered and preserved to benefit the soul in its reincarnated existence. Plato propounded that the immaterial component of man, the soul, was a complex entity composed of several distinct, yet related, elements. Highest in the hierarchy of the soul's elements he situated the spirit, which, he taught, comprised consciousness, intelligence, volition, and moral agency inter alia. This element he deemed absolutely indestructible and immortal, locating its seat within the head. Subsequently, there followed two additional aspects of the soul which survived the dissolution of the body but were only comparatively immortal. That is to say, they remained subject to eventual dissolution and disintegration. Of these semi-material elements, one constituted the seat of the affections and passions, situated within the heart. The other, functioning as the seat of sensual and lower desires, was located within the liver. These two aforementioned lower elements were regarded as devoid of reason, yet possessed of certain faculties of sensation, perception, and volition. The Neoplatonists, who succeeded Plato and adapted his teachings to their distinct and often conflicting ideologies, adhered firmly to the doctrine of reincarnation. The writings of Plotinus, Porphyry, and other mystics expounded extensively upon this subject, and the doctrine was significantly refined under their influence. The Jewish philosophers were impacted by the influence of Platonic thought, and the school of the Essenes, which held steadfastly to the concept of rebirth, constituted a source from which Christianity derived much of its early inspiration. Chapter 4. Jewish and Early Christian Mysteries. The ancient Hebraic society possessed an inner teaching which encompassed specific concepts pertaining to reincarnation, although the general populace remained ignorant of this doctrine, which was sequestered within the inner circles of the select few. There exists considerable academic contention regarding the primordial beliefs of the Jewish people concerning the immortality of the soul. The preeminent authorities appear to concur that these early tenets were notably rudimentary and amorphous, consisting principally of a general conviction that, following death, souls are gathered together in an obscure realm, designated as Sheol, where they reside in a state of dormant oblivion. One may observe that the earlier books of the Old Testament contain a paucity of discourse upon this subject. Gradually, however, one may discern an emergent conviction regarding certain conditions of disembodied spirits. In this respect, the Jews were undoubtedly impacted by the cosmological paradigms of neighboring civilizations with whom they interacted. The period of residence in Egypt must have imparted a profound effect upon them, particularly upon the intellectual elite of the race, of whom, however, there were but few, owing to the condition of servitude in which they were held by the Egyptians. Moses, however, by virtue of his education and training among the Egyptian priesthood, must have been fully inducted into the mysteries of that land, and Jewish legends would indicate that he established an inner circle of the priesthood among his people following their exodus from Egypt. He doubtless imparted comprehensive instruction regarding the arcane tenets, which, however, were excessively abstruse and complex to be preached to the unenlightened multitude of which the Jewish race of that era was composed. The beacon of erudition among the Jews of that time was preserved by only a very few priests among them. There has always existed substantial discourse and legend concerning this esoteric pedagogy among the Jews. The Jewish rabbis have expounded extensively regarding it, and certain early fathers of the Christian Church maintained the conviction that such secret doctrine existed. Scholars have observed that in significant textual excerpts within the Jewish Bible, 3 distinct terms are utilized in referring to the incorporeal aspect, or soul, of man. These terms are neshama, ruach, and nephesh, respectively, and they have been rendered as soul, spirit, or breath in the various semantic interpretations of these words. Many reputable authorities have posited that these 3 terms did not designate a singular concept, but that, on the contrary, they referred to 3 distinct elements of the soul, analogous to the conceptions of the Egyptians and other ancient peoples who adhered to the Trinity of the soul, as we have demonstrated previously. Some Hebrew scholars posit that neshama is the ego, or intelligent spirit, ruach, the subordinate vessel of the ego, and nephesh, the vital force, vitality, or life. Students of the Kabbalah, or secret writings of the Jews, discover within its pages numerous references to the complex nature of the soul and its future states, as well as indisputable doctrines regarding reincarnation, or corporeal reembodiment. The Kabbalah was the volume of the Jewish mysteries and was predominantly allegorical, such that to those uninitiated in the symbols employed, it appeared devoid of coherence or meaning. However, those possessing the interpretive cipher were able to discern therefrom many fragments of concealed dogma. The Kabbalah is said to be shrouded in 7 layers of concealment, that is, its symbology is 7-fold. So that only those possessing the inner keys may comprehend the full truth contained therein, although even the initial key will reveal numerous mysteries. The Zohar, another secret book of the Jews, although of more recent provenance than the Kabbalah, also comprises a significant portion of the inner teachings concerning the destiny of the soul. This volume explicitly acknowledges and delineates the 3-fold nature of the soul mentioned above, and treats the neshama, ruach, and nephesh as distinct elements thereof. It also teaches that when the soul departs the body, it undergoes a protracted and arduous purification process, whereby the effect of its vices is eradicated by means of a series of transmigrations and reincarnations, wherein it cultivates various virtues, and so forth. This concept of achieving consummation through repeated rebirths, rather than the rebirths constituting a form of punishment as taught by Plato, is also propounded in the Kabbalah, demonstrating the consensus within Hebraic thought regarding this detail of the doctrine. The fundamental core of the Kabbalistic teaching on this subject is that souls experience cyclical reincarnation, after long intervals of rest and purification, in total oblivion of their previous existences, and for the purpose of advancement, evolution, purification, development, and attainment. The Zohar adheres to this teaching strictly, although with elaborations. The following quotation from the Zohar is compelling, inasmuch as it articulates the teaching on the subject succinctly. It is transcribed as follows. All souls are subjected to the trials of transmigration, and men remain ignorant of the ways of the Most High in their regard. They comprehend not how many transformations and mysterious trials they must undergo, nor how many souls and spirits descend into this realm without returning to the palace of the Divine King. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.